Hi, I'm Sravish. This is Trust Talks, and today I have with me Dan Walsh, Chief Information Security Officer at VillageMD, and who I believe should be a character actor in the movies instead of being a CISO. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on Trust Talks today.
Thank you, and I won't hold your poor movie taste against you.
Dan, I think you have the face and the intellect to be in the movies, so we should have a conversation
All
around how
right.
we can
Well,
make
my,
that
my
happen.
mother always thought I had a face for radio, so we'll leave it at that.
Dan, to kick things off, one of the things I heard you tell me a while back, and I've heard you say this story in public as well, was that you had a mentor and a boss early on in your career who gave you the advice that if you want to work effectively with her, you have to earn chips in her
Yep.
bank.
Yep.
And when I heard that story, it was all about how can you continuously earn trust with your colleagues, but also how is that a mechanism to advance your career over time? I would love for you to share with everybody, what does trust mean to you as a chief information security officer, and what does it mean to you as a colleague in your
Yeah.
company?
So I actually have an acronym for trust. So I think trust stands for a few things. The first thing trust stands for is transparency. Um, as a manager, can you be transparent with your people? Probably not with everything, but when it comes to the things that matter to them, in terms of direction, in terms of accountability, I think that that's core. As a colleague, I think it's absolutely crucial for people to understand where you're coming from, the limiting factors that you might be dealing with, because they can. When that happens, they're in the best position to partner with you. And then to vendors, I think it's the same thing. Like, hey, I don't need this particular product or service this time, or I do, or here's how you're meeting the mark, here's how you're missing the mark. So I think being transparent is crucial. I think the second thing is respect is a crucial element of trust, right? If I don't have respect for you, that's going to be very difficult to trust somebody.
Yep.
Respect for, the position they're in, respect for the challenges they're facing, just like common human decency. Then the third thing is understanding, right? So understanding where they're coming from, understanding, how they're incented, how they operate, what the constraints of their business are. The fourth thing is service, right? We should be in service to one another. We should take a servant leader approach. We should always seek, like, how can I help you? How can I make things better? And when I have someone who's partnering with me or coming alongside of me with that type of an attitude, that goes a long way towards really solid trust. And the final element is time. Trust needs to be something that's repeatable and consistent over time. And the more time that I have with you, the more time that we've partnered together, whether it's through a friendship or professional collaboration, I'm going to have more and more trust. And so when I think about trust, those are some of the elements that I think about.
That's a wonderful description. I might actually copy that and start using that in some of my marketing, Dan. That's phenomenal. One of the other areas that I've been exploring a lot, in addition to the 5 things that you said, was how can you bring accountability to a trusted relationship, either internally with your colleagues or perhaps with your board of directors or with your vendors, partners, government, etc. And it's hard to bring accountability if there's no data around this. Right? I mean, you started your career as a data miner,
Right.
where you were constantly looking for insights on what is the data doing. But data in security and privacy today is held really close to your chest. How can we build trust with, for example, our board of directors, or even with our vendors or with external stakeholders, if we haven't transformed the security and privacy industry to be more data-driven and to be more open with data? How will that happen?
So I think the way that will happen is there's a couple things that need to occur. I think one, we need to become less tribalistic, meaning like I'm protecting so often we confuse I'm protecting the company's data with I'm protecting the data from the company, right? And we want to make sure that we are using that data in such a way that we can, allow that, those trust conversations to occur, those trust partnerships to occur. And I see this a lot with B2B relationships in business, where you have a business customer and a business vendor, and there might be millions of dollars at stake. But the
Yeah.
reality of it is like when we're talking about security, we need to work towards a place where we're able to be transparent with them, where we say, look, we're taking a risk-based approach. We're not perfect. Here's where we're at. Here's the realities of our business. Here's the reality of the level of investment we're able to make at the rate that we're, at the state of our business. And I think far too often, we're in a mode where we don't want to kind of admit those things. We don't want to admit
Yeah.
that some skeletons in the closet that need some tending to. And back to the earlier conversation where you mentioned, that manager that I had, her name was Cecilia, and she said, you need to earn my trust. I feel like out of politeness, a lot of people don't want to have that conversation. And so what actually happens is there's a superficial level of trust because people are too polite to say, look, I don't trust you because frankly, I don't know you from Adam.
Yeah.
And I think, while that may be off, I think that, that approach might catch people off guard. I actually think it's, in the right context, it's actually a valuable conversation to have. And I think organizations should have those types of conversations. Like, look, we just met. We need to verify some things. Here's kind of a starting point, and understand, where the other is starting from. And I feel like, particularly with vendors in the security space, they try to buy your time with like tchotchkes or a bottle of wine or with iPods or whatever, as
Yeah.
opposed to, and maybe that hooks some people in, but the majority of CISOs that I work with that are colleagues of mine, we want to hear it from another CISO. We're going to hear from a really interesting product demo that catches their eye, and because that's how you start to build trust, right?
Yeah.
You're not gonna build trust with me if you send me a, little one of those little, like, I saw someone, saying, hey, we'll send you like this little like cool stove to like smoke marshmallow or cook marshmallows over. Yeah, that's, I guess, great, but that's not a way to build trust. And if anything, a lot of the times I think those things backfire because you're essentially saying to the CISO, I'm willing to bribe you
Yeah.
in the very small chance that I can then close a deal. And I think that, and look, it's a part of the business. I understand that. I know there's probably a lot of business won that way, but when you're talking about building trust, I realize that folks are just trying to get the attention of the CISO, the opportunity to build that trust. So I definitely recognize that that's the case when it comes to those situations.
Yeah. There's a GRC vendor currently that is running an ad where they're going to send you a Yeti tumbler if you would take a meeting with them. So what you're saying resonates. It's starting to be used as, like you said, a bribe to get a meeting versus giving you a reason to trust them and actually be intrigued by them and take a chance
Yeah.
on them.
Yeah. And it's tough too, because like CISOs are busy.
Yeah.
We're almost always reacting. Like we would love to say like we're planning 80% of the time, but we're not.
Yeah.
We're reacting most of the time to our business and to the threatened landscape in our environment. And so I understand that that's kind of where this, the sales cycle or the sales tactics have gone to. But I think this continuous asking of how can I earn your trust, or how can I gain your trust, or hey, can I get your attention through being trustworthy? I do think for some organizations, once they reach a certain size, I would say in the 2 billion plus range, at that point, like, people know who you are and they know that you're
Yeah.
either trustworthy or you're not. And I've seen companies that hit that size and then raised another, massive round, and then they shot themselves in the foot because they had to get very aggressive to meet those sales goals. And they were,
Yeah.
one vendor in particular was, hounding me on Twitter, hounding me on LinkedIn, hounding me in email. And then when I finally got through to them, they started hounding all my direct reports, right?
Yeah.
Good way to lose trust.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned sales. A big part of what vendors are trying to do in this space is to connect with folks like you,
Yeah.
whether they're selling you security tools or even if they're selling you your company other products. At some point, you need to do a risk assessment and a risk analysis
Right.
about that vendor from a security and privacy standpoint. One of the things I've found is that a lot of startups have boards of directors primarily populated by operators with sales experience, marketing experience, in some cases, product experience, or with investors, VCs, who are primarily coming from a finance background.
Right.
What advice would you want these investors, these board members, to be giving their leadership team and executive team around security and privacy? And what do you think from a board governance standpoint, the board members should be almost demanding and mandating from their executive team so that when they do end up at your desk and you're evaluating them, they're in a position where you could say, this is a good vendor from a security and privacy standpoint? What's missing in the startup board governance area?
So I think, so I'll talk very strategically and I'll also talk very tactically. So to begin very strategically, if you look at the track record of VCs, about 50% of their portfolio gets written off over the long term. They're just not successful. You'll have about 5 or 10% really hit it, like 10x, 20x, and everything else is kind of mediocre.
Sure.
And I think the big part of that is, respectfully, I think most VCs are just people that have money and they're not really former security operators.
Yeah.
So I think one, they're kind of just looking at it as like cybersecurity is hot, we can make a lot of money. So I would say strategically, I would encourage them to surround themselves with, CISOs who have, or people who have operated as a CISO, who have entrepreneurial background, experiences outside of just being a security leader, and leverage some of those folks to fill some of those board slots.
Yeah.
I think the second thing I would do tactically is, as you know, I'm a big fan of SBOM, software bill of materials. And right now, I think SBOM is at a place where the government's getting very interested in it. As a CISO, one of the things that I do is, if I'm looking at a software vendor that, processes, stores, or transmits PHI, I will ask for an SBOM. I don't always get it because as an industry, we're still evolving there. But I think that tactically, boards and VCs need to make sure that their security products that they're selling to the market are highly secure.
Yeah.
And, a basic way of doing that is to take a look at the SBOM, scan for vulnerabilities, making sure that they're not running into open source licensing conflicts or complications, making sure that they have some of the basic controls in place and basic governance in place. Because aside from features and pricing, there's no really good way that I know standardly that CISOs and organizations will evaluate software through. And if I can use an SBOM and I can compare one vulnerability management tool scanner to another one, and I can see that the one has aging software and vulnerabilities and the other one doesn't, now that's actually a real way that I can take a look at and see, yes, this, vulnerability scanner X is superior to Y in these ways.
Yeah.
And I think when CISOs start to go down that path, not just with security software, but with software for the business, when they empower the business to know that they can ask for this through the procurement process, I think software is going to get more trustworthy out of the gate. Because right now, what you're relying on is essentially a spreadsheet or a questionnaire, even if it's automated, to answer a series of questions. And a lot of those questions will ask for evidence. Some of them will require like a SOC 2 or something like that. But I've seen companies with pristine, vendor security assessments and questionnaires come back with an SBOM that's riddled with problems. And so I think that that's going to be another dynamic by which we're able to ascertain risk. And if I'm a VC with a portfolio of companies, say I have 50 companies in my portfolio, I want to know where my risk is at technically.
Yeah.
I want to know when the next Log4j occurs at the click of a button, then I can see like, hey, here's where my risk resides and lies. And I think that SBOM will be the place where it goes. Now, on the flip side of that, we're going to have to make sure that legally, with that level of transparency, that there is some protection for the company, particularly if we're going to share it with vendors, because we don't want people to, nickel and dime companies over every single vulnerability.
Right.
We don't want VCs to nickel and dime their portfolio over every single vulnerability, because the reality of it is you could build a product, and if you're spending all your time trying to remediate the vulnerabilities, you might not be building features for customers that demand it. So it will need to be further defined. But I think that's, in my opinion, that's the direction the industry needs to go.
Yeah, I love that thought. One of the things you said was, if I were a VC, you would want X, Y, and Z to evaluate risk. And the problem is, like you said, there aren't many security professionals who are being invited to be on
Yep.
the boards of directors. And so there's an awareness gap of what questions to ask and what questions to demand from the executive team as part of board governance. Whereas VCs know what questions to ask from a sales standpoint and a marketing standpoint, but they don't know what questions to ask from a security standpoint. So it feels to me like there needs to be a movement where CISOs like you are getting together and saying, this is an idea of what the standard should be like
Right.
around board governance. And if this level of board governance doesn't exist, then it's going to be difficult for us to buy products from these vendors.
Yeah. I think you'll begin to see it in another way, which is right now the SEC is proposing some changes to how board directors operate.
Yeah.
One of those changes will be that the companies will have to attest to the cybersecurity experience of their board via resume or CV or something else. And so I think that will also matriculate down to the VC level at some point, because look, if you're a VC and you're investing in a company, the ultimate, home run or grand slam is that they IPO and they make their investors a ton of money. So I think that will begin to matriculate down. I think it's just a matter of when.
Yeah. Dan, I'm going to say a phrase to you.
Sure.
And I want you to tell me what comes to mind as soon as you hear those words. Ready?
Okay. Yep. Go ahead.
Security questionnaires.
A little bit of dread, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. No, I think it's, I would say another word that comes to mind is inconsistency. Because different, customers, if I'm on the receiving end of that, have different questions. They might be 80% the same, but be worded a little bit differently. I think the other thing is positioning is another phrase that comes to mind, and we're trying to position this in the best light so our company can land these sales. If I'm sending these out, it's kind of the same. It's like, what are we going to get back? How much of this is BS? How much of this isn't BS? I asked for a pen test and they sent me one of their internal network, but I'm buying a SaaS product. Like, that's not really helpful. Those are some of the phrases that come to mind.
A mentor of mine once told me that he felt security questionnaires was like the Japanese art form of kabuki theater.
That's a good way to describe it.
There's a lot of showing and a lot of puffery going on, but ultimately it's a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is smoke and mirrors. And one of the questions I had as a follow-up for you was, if the industry generally believes that this concept of evaluating risk through security questionnaires is not the ideal solution, what is the ideal solution in your mind? What's a better way to evaluate the security posture and the privacy posture of a company?
So I go back to, I'm a big fan of SBOM. So really the reason why I am is it's a machine readable format that I can, in theory, continuously verify. So I'm a big fan of continuous verification. We talk a lot about zero trust. I think in the GRC side, we should talk about continuous trust.
Yeah.
And, I have this futuristic view of how security is going to work in 20 years, which is, every company is going to be listed on a trust exchange like the NASDAQ, right? And we will see trust go up and trust go down as events happen. As Log4j comes out, maybe this company, because they're using their stock price, if you will drop. If they invest in a new security tool, the futures will go up. And not that people will be buying and trading, although maybe some people will figure a way to monetize it on DraftKings or something. But it's really this line that companies will operate, and we'll have an upper control limit and a lower control limit, and we're going to want to stay within that. And then when catastrophic things come out, it will drop it below an acceptable tolerance. When they go up, that's great. Although maybe that's a false. Maybe there's some baloney going on there.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's also going to have to be the acceptance that we have of, yes, our vendors aren't perfect.
Yep.
And while I want an unqualified SOC 2 and I want zero vulnerabilities in their environment, if we're going to open up this level of trust and open up the kimono, so to speak, then you have to be willing to see some things that you're not super happy about. But
Yeah.
when you weigh the reward against the risk, it's worth it.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think, like you said, there's both the good and the bad that comes with transparency, and I think that requires a level of maturity to be okay when things go wrong. And I almost think,
Right.
like, as with any personal relationship, things will go wrong,
Yes.
and it's important to have the mindset that you're willing to partner with each other to remediate it and get better over time. And
That's
I
right.
think that's missing in the current process, which is either a written or unwritten contract between two parties saying, I'm willing to work with you to improve. Most contracts today basically says, if you don't do what I want you to do in the contract, I'm going to
We're walking. Right.
you, right, or
Yep.
walk away.
Yep. Yep.
And I
Yep.
think it requires a mindset where people are willing to be more collaborative with each other.
Yep. No, I agree. I agree. I also think it will align the business closer to the security team.
Right.
I think right now, you have a lot of security teams that are like I'll give you a perfect example. If you follow ISACA and that you
Mm-hmm.
subscribe to their, and I think ISACA is a great organization to be clear, and I've contributed to their CISM and their CDPSE
Yeah.
certification in terms of exam development. One of the key concept they talk about is this concept of this business impact analysis, which is we're
Yeah.
going to do this analysis to understand the impact that an event would occur and what the risk of that is. Therefore, we can establish the risk appetite of the organization.
Yeah.
In real life, I've never seen a company do a big business impact analysis.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what that is. BIA, what is that? Is that like the CIA? I have no idea. And so one of the things that I think CISOs are constantly trying to understand is like, what is our business risk tolerance? Because you say that it's like, well, we have no tolerance for the risk. But in practicality, that first of all, that's not realistic or that's impractical. But second of all, like there's a lot of gray in there. And so how do we make sure that we're aligned? Because the business is saying, well, that's kind of what we have you CISO for. And we really don't understand like this technical jargon, like print nightmare. Like I don't even know what that is. Like should we patch it right away? Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. And the CISO, I think, is looking for sometimes like, how do we what makes sense to prioritize? And again, it's within a small bit of gray, but I think that when we start to have these type of conversations of like, hey, legal needs to review this paragraph in this master service agreement that talks about, or this contract that talks about a risk tolerance, talks about the fact that it's not going to be perfect, that talks about what happens if we see, this level of vulnerability or this level of misconfiguration, because it will happen. Now we're starting to have that risk conversation to be real for the business, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to letting we have you so we don't get hacked. Like that mentality I think is going to be shifting if we move more towards a transparency model.
Yeah. Totally makes sense to me. One of the theses that I have is that CISOs as well as GRC professionals in their organization need a different title. And I think the title should be they are trust champions. They are the folks that are the custodians of trust in their organization, because a lot of the work that they do is tied to contractual commitments and regulatory
Right.
commitments that they're making. And also a lot of the work that they do is trying to advance sales and generate revenue.
Right.
And so if you can map the activities happening in a security and privacy organization to the business impact that is being created, I think it puts the business in a position to really appreciate the importance of the work. And I think that's a gap in the industry today.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Speaking of trust champions, Dan, a big believer in me, I believe in mentor-backed entrepreneurship. A lot of people say you got to be a venture-backed company. I love to be a mentor-backed company because I love to have folks that are experienced, that have been there, done that, learned a lot, to be in my corner, helping me in my journey. Who is a CISO that you've looked up to, and there could be multiple of them, that you felt is a trust champion in their organization, where they're trying to elevate the idea of not just being a security professional or a privacy professional, but they're looking to elevate it to being a lot more rigorous, a lot more transparent, a lot more effective, and tying it to business impact? Who comes to mind in your CISO community of people of that kind?
Well, there's a lot of them, I would say. Nick Vigier over at Talon comes to mind. Gary Hayslip at SoftBank comes to mind. Andy Ellis, he's now at Orca and Wild Ventures. Sunil over at Jupiter One. I mean, I could go on and on. There's a ton of them, and I probably just offended some of them for not mentioning them. But I feel like people that operate with trust, Alan Alford's another one. They find each other over the course of time, because you'll see something they say at a conference or on LinkedIn or in a book. Matt Stamper is another one that it just kind of resonates. And you're like, yeah, that guy or that girl gets it. Like they're one of my people, type of thing.
Yeah.
Marty at Wayfair, another one. And so I feel like they're definitely out there. And like I said, I know I just probably shortchanged a bunch of people without mentioning them, but yeah, those are the folks that to me really kind of just scream trust. And and they're also folks that the longer I go in security, the more I realize things truly are gray, just shades of gray. Yeah, there's black and white things, of course, like in terms of like nation state threat actor or something like that. But a lot of it is where's your company at, where's your organization at in this time, in this period of time, and where company's at. If they're if you are a struggling startup right now trying to weather the recession because your customer base is dried up because they're cutting back, that's a bigger threat, frankly, than cybersecurity at the moment for you. Obviously you see all the layoffs occurring across the tech industry, and for those people, it's to get a job, right? That's the biggest thing they got to worry about right now, and how they're going to pay the bills, type of thing. So I think people that just have operated for a period of time, probably the folks that really understand trust the most.
Yeah. And on a similar note, I've always felt like as leaders, we are only as good as our team. And so if we apply to be trust leaders and trust champions, there needs to be a team that we are working with that have the same ethos, the same commitment, and the same passion for doing the work.
Yep.
Who have you worked with on your team where you've looked at where they've motivated you to up your game? Because in some ways they've demanded of you that we have to do better.
I mean, I could list my whole team.
I love that.
I could list my whole team. I'll just name some first names because maybe they don't want to be called out. But think of Jessica, Nash, Mike, Fran, Dan, Joe, Emily, Tom, CJ, Laura, Dwight, Jake, Savan, Grant, Mr. Wilson, all of them. And
I love it.
and we're getting new team members, as you know, because of the Summit deal. And so that I had even mentioned all of them over there, but folks over there as well, that who I've not yet met. I know their names, but I haven't met them yet. And so looking forward to that. But I mean, I would say that, and then even folks that I worked with, when I was at Rally Health, the team there that I worked with, I would not be where I'm at today. DJ Schleen's another one, Julio Jimenez, another one, the folks that we've worked with in the past. When you have trust of those people, and you agree to a common goal and common vision, then you execute on it and you make your business that much better. Again, you just have, this is why people follow people from different companies and they want to work together. And, one of the things that's interesting to me is this dynamic of people trying to break into security. And we want to be inclusive. We want to include the younger generation, folks who've not had exposure to it. At the same time, we're constrained by resources
Yeah.
often, and it's a trust game.
Yeah.
So some of these folks we don't know, and I've taken chances on people that I've never worked with before in the past, and it's worked out. And then we've taken chances on people we've also never worked in the past, and it hasn't worked out. And so it's very interesting when you're in the business of trust, kind of how that influences the way that you bring people into the fold, and you bring people into security. And I don't want it to ever feel like it's a club. I feel like it's more like and not to disrespect, any sort of service job like the police force or the military, but it's really like almost like there's an element of service to it.
You're right.
Because you're signing up for sometimes a very unpredictable work schedule, in a very dynamic environment, where the stakes are high. And so, I do feel like once you've gone through an incident or two with somebody, that's also another way that you really establish that trust, because you've kind of gone through the trenches with them, so to speak. So yeah, I know I'm rambling at this point, but I would not be a two-time CISO, right? Fancy title, Mr. Fancy CISO, right? Mr. Fancy, if it wasn't for my team, bottom line.
Well said. Well said. I love it. You mentioned something a couple of minutes earlier about the fact that the job is difficult, it's unpredictable, it's stressful. I'd love to ask you some questions about that from your past, but do it
Sure.
with a little bit of jest instead of
Sure.
instead of asking you war stories. So if you could remember a situation where you had to deal with a breach, what food did you want to eat?
What food would I want to eat, or what food did I eat? So for whatever reason, breaches seem to occur at 11 o'clock at night, or at least I find out about them at 11 o'clock at night. Um, you know, so I would say my diet mainly goes to liquid, which is like drinking a lot of coffee, and then maybe like eating a protein bar or two. I'm one of the types of people that I get hyper focused on something, and when we're dealing with a breach, the world kind of fades away, and I just deal with incident response at that point, make sure we're asking the right questions, pulling in the right people, communicating the business the right way. And so, because I am very mission oriented, I will do what I need to do to stay alive, and not much more. So, if I have to, even run out to the drive-through and pick up something, like just to scarf something down on a war room call, I would do that. So it's probably not the healthiest choice, but that's kind of what I rely on from a food point of view when I deal with an incident.
At least when you said liquid, you said coffee and not any other type of liquid, Dan.
Well, yes, I need to have for an incident serious, I need to have all my faculties operating correctly. So to make sure that I'm just kidding, but yeah, no, we want to make sure that we're dealing with the incident at hand. And then also checking on the other team to make sure that we're rotating people off if we need to.
Yeah.
You go take a nap or something, or make sure that we're kind of spreading the stress out, so to speak, but also being responsive, given that they need to be timely.
Yeah. I once spoke to somebody who said, as soon as I get a security questionnaire, I carve out time on a Friday evening, and I like to answer security questionnaires drinking a glass of wine, because that's what makes it fun. Have you ever had a dream about a security incident and you woke up from that nightmare? You have. Tell me more.
So I don't dream very often. I don't know if that's just an adult thing. I don't dream hardly at all. But I have had an incident before I dreamt I had an incident before, and I woke up in the middle of the night and realized it was just a dream. I was like, okay. I did have a hard time going back to bed, so I stayed up and read a book, but yeah, that's happened me once or twice.
Dan, you've been a phenomenal guest at Trust Talks. Thank you so much for taking the time with us and speaking to the audience. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Dan.
Sure.